He causeth the grass to grow for the cattle, and herb for the service of man, that he may bring forth food out of the earth. Psalm 104:14. What if I told you that the difference between life and death in a post-apocalyptic world isn't a bunker full of tinned food or a gun cabinet packed to the ceiling, but a small patch of dirt and the right 11 crops growing in it? Most people don't know this, but whilst everyone is stockpiling freeze-dried meals and panic-buying bottled water, the real survivors throughout human history have always been the ones who understood the soil beneath their feet. Every major civilization that endured famine, war, and collapse did so because of one thing: they knew what to grow. And today I'm going to show you 11 of them that will change the way you think about survival, preparedness, and the ancient relationship between humanity and the earth. Stick around, because number 7 on this list is a crop so incredibly versatile and nutritionally complete that entire ancient empires were built on its back. And most modern Australians have never once grown it in their garden. And number 11, it's a plant so resilient it can be grown in near total darkness underground, requires almost no water, and produces food in weeks rather than months. You'll want to hear this one. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because we post new videos every week that the pharmaceutical companies and the industrial food complex would rather you never watched. Knowledge is the one resource they can't tax, and this channel is dedicated to making sure you're never left defenseless. So let's get into it. Here are 11 crops to grow in a post-apocalyptic world for survival, ranked from remarkable to absolutely miraculous. Number 1, sweet potatoes, the underground insurance policy. Let's start with a crop that has quietly fed humanity through some of its darkest chapters. Sweet potatoes have been cultivated for over 5,000 years, with origins stretching back to the ancient civilizations of Central and South America. Polynesian navigators, among the greatest open ocean travelers the world has ever seen, carried sweet potatoes with them as they colonized the Pacific. And when European explorers arrived in places like New Zealand and Hawaii, sweet potatoes were already thriving. That alone should tell you everything. If a crop can survive a canoe voyage across the open Pacific and take root on remote islands, it can survive a collapse. Modern science has caught up with what ancient peoples already understood. Sweet potatoes are extraordinarily dense in beta-carotene, which the human body converts to vitamin A, a nutrient that becomes critically scarce in survival situations and whose deficiency leads to blindness, compromised immunity, and death. A single medium-sized sweet potato delivers more than your entire daily requirement. Beyond that, they're rich in vitamin C, potassium, manganese, and dietary fiber. Recent research has highlighted that purple-fleshed varieties contain anthocyanins, potent antioxidants with anti-inflammatory properties that support the immune system under physical stress. Here's the traditional use. You plant the slips, small vine cuttings from an existing tuber, and within 90 to 120 days, you have a harvest. You can eat the leaves as a green vegetable. You can eat them raw, roasted, boiled, or mashed. Every part of the plant feeds you. Sweet potatoes got overshadowed by the white potato after European colonization reshaped global agriculture, and the food industry preferred crops that could be standardized, processed, and packaged at scale. But in a world without supermarkets, the sweet potato reclaims its throne. Think of it as the savings account buried in your garden, always there, always growing, always quietly building your reserves when everything else feels uncertain. Number 2, amaranth. The grain the conquistadors tried to erase. Let's start with one of the most astonishing cover-ups in agricultural history. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in the Americas in the 16th century, they didn't just conquer cities. They systematically destroyed amaranth crops and made it illegal to grow them. Why? Because amaranth was the sacred grain of the Aztec Empire. It was used in religious ceremonies, and the Spanish knew that to break the people, they had to break their food. Modern science has caught up in remarkable ways. Amaranth is one of the very few plant-based sources of complete protein, meaning it contains all 9 essential amino acids in proportions comparable to animal protein. It is also extraordinarily high in lysine, an amino acid almost entirely absent from most other grains, including wheat, rice, and corn. In a world where animal protein becomes scarce, this distinction could be the margin between muscle wasting and physical strength. Amaranth is also gluten-free, grows rapidly, and tolerates drought conditions that would destroy most other crops. Here's the traditional use. Both the seeds and the leaves are edible. The seeds can be cooked like porridge, popped like popcorn, or ground into a flour that makes dense, nutritious flatbreads. The leaves taste similar to spinach and can be eaten raw or cooked. One plant produces thousands of seeds per season, making the yield per square meter extraordinary. Amaranth got forgotten in the West because the colonial food system deliberately suppressed it for centuries, and by the time those restrictions lifted, wheat and corn had already captured the industrial food infrastructure. This wasn't natural selection. This was the erasure of knowledge by those who stood to profit from dependency. Think of it as the survivor that outlasted the empire that tried to kill it. Proof that genuine resilience cannot be permanently suppressed. And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." Genesis 1:29, number 3, Moringa. The tree that ends hunger. What if I told you there's a tree that can grow from a cutting to a harvestable food source in under 6 months, produce edible leaves every single week, and deliver more nutrition per gram than almost anything else you could plant in a survival garden? Most people in Australia have never heard of moringa, let alone grown it. But in parts of Asia and Africa, it has been called the miracle tree for centuries. And it is only now that Western science is beginning to understand why. Modern research confirms that moringa leaves contain more calcium than milk, more iron than spinach, more vitamin C than oranges, and more potassium than bananas, all in a single source. They also carry high concentrations of vitamin A, vitamin B6, and all 9 essential amino acids. In clinical studies conducted in malnourished populations, moringa supplementation produced measurable improvements in nutritional status within weeks. This wasn't a pharmaceutical trial with synthesized compounds. This was a tree doing what no laboratory product has ever matched. Here's the traditional use. In India and Southeast Asia, moringa has been used medicinally and nutritionally for over 4,000 years. The leaves are dried and ground into a powder added to soups, porridges and flatbreads. The young seed pods are cooked as a vegetable. The seeds can be pressed for oil. Every part of this tree is functional. Moringa got overshadowed by the industrial supplement industry, which found it difficult to patent a tree and far more profitable to sell expensive capsules of isolated nutrients. The knowledge of moringa was never lost in communities where it grows natively. It was simply never imported into the Western food consciousness. Think of it as a complete pharmacy and grocery store growing in a single tree, waiting for the moment you need it most. Number 4, cassava, the resilience champion. This is a crop that has survived where nothing else would. Cassava is the single most drought-resistant starchy crop on the planet. It can grow in poor, degraded soils that would starve any other food plant. It was the backbone of civilizations across South America, Africa, and eventually Asia, and it remains the primary calorie source for over 500 million people today. Modern science has documented cassava's extraordinary ability to produce meaningful caloric yields under conditions of extreme water stress. Unlike wheat or rice, which collapse without reliable irrigation, cassava continues storing energy in its thick roots even during prolonged dry periods. The roots can remain in the ground for up to 3 years after maturity, essentially serving as a living pantry. You harvest only what you need when you need it. Here's the traditional use. The roots must be properly processed. Peeling and thorough cooking removes naturally occurring compounds that cause toxicity in raw form. Once processed, cassava can be boiled, fried, dried and ground into flour or fermented. The fermented form, known as gari in West Africa, has sustained millions of people through famines and is extraordinarily shelf-stable once dried. Cassava got overshadowed in the developed world because it doesn't photograph well for food magazines, and the processed food industry prefers wheat and corn, whose properties are easier to standardize. But in a world without those luxuries, cassava's ability to grow in the worst conditions makes it utterly irreplaceable. Think of it as the underground vault of calories, patient, durable, and always there when everything else has given up. Number 5. Kale, the ancient green that never needed reinventing. Long before kale became the emblem of overpriced smoothies in inner-city cafes, it was the everyday green of peasant populations across medieval Europe who were simply trying to survive winter. Kale is one of the oldest cultivated vegetables known to humanity, with records of its use stretching back more than 2,000 years across ancient Greece and Rome. It was so fundamental to the Scottish diet that the word kale was used synonymously with dinner in the Scots language. Modern science has since confirmed what those hardscrabble populations knew by necessity. Kale is extraordinarily high in vitamins K, A, C and B6, as well as calcium, copper, potassium and manganese. It contains sulforaphane, a compound linked to powerful anti-inflammatory and cellular protective effects. In a survival context, supporting cardiovascular function, bone density, and immune resilience is not a luxury. It is the difference between a body that functions and one that doesn't. Here's the traditional use. Kale tolerates frost, grows through winter in most of Australia's temperate zones, and can be harvested leaf by leaf over many months without destroying the plant. It can be eaten raw, boiled, steamed, added to soups and stews, or dried and ground into powder for storage. A mature kale plant can produce harvestable leaves for more than a year. Kale got overshadowed by the industrialization of vegetable production, which prioritized softer, faster-growing greens that photograph better and ship more easily. But in a world without cold storage or supply chains, kale's durability and multi-season yield make it the single most practical green vegetable a survivalist can grow. Think of it as the workhorse of the survival garden, never glamorous, never complicated, always doing exactly what it's supposed to. The fruit thereof shall be for meat, and the leaf thereof for medicine. Ezekiel 47:12. Number 6. Cowpeas, the ancient protein of the poor and the wise. Most Australians know these as black-eyed peas, but cowpeas have fed the world under dozens of names across Africa, Asia, and the Americas for more than 5,000 years. They were among the first crops cultivated by humans, and for good reason. This was not a crop of abundance or luxury. This was the crop of communities that knew they had to feed themselves through anything. Modern research has validated cowpeas as an exceptional source of plant protein, along with folate, iron, potassium, and soluble dietary fiber. They also have a unique agronomic property that makes them invaluable in a survival garden. They fix atmospheric nitrogen back into the soil. This means that growing cowpeas actively improves the ground for subsequent crops, requiring no synthetic fertilizer. In a world without chemical inputs, this soil-building function could be the single most important agricultural advantage you have. Here's the traditional use. Cowpeas can be boiled and eaten whole, ground into flour, fermented into protein-rich pastes, or dried, and stored for years without refrigeration. The young leaves and pods are also edible as vegetables. They grow rapidly, often producing a harvestable crop within 60 days, and thrive in hot, dry conditions that would devastate more sensitive legumes. Cowpeas got overshadowed because industrial agriculture favored soybeans, which were easier to mechanize at scale, and the Western food system quietly phased out crops that communities could grow, save, and replant without buying anything. This wasn't inefficiency. This was a design choice made by an industry that profits from dependency. Think of it as the crop that feeds you today and prepares the ground for everything you'll grow tomorrow. Number 7, quinoa. The complete food that built an empire. Here it is. Number 7. The crop so extraordinary that the Inca Empire, one of the largest and most sophisticated civilizations the Americas ever produced, was built upon it. The Inca called quinoa the mother of all grains, and the depth of their reverence was no superstition, it was precision. They understood, through generations of observation, that quinoa was not simply a food. It was a system for keeping people alive under the most brutal conditions the Andes could deliver. Modern science has since confirmed that quinoa is one of the only plant foods on Earth to contain a complete protein profile with all 9 essential amino acids in ratios approaching those of eggs. It is also rich in magnesium, phosphorus, iron, zinc and fiber, and contains high levels of quercetin and kaempferol, flavonoids linked to significant anti-inflammatory and immune-supporting effects. It is naturally gluten-free and provides stable energy across long working hours, exactly what a survival scenario demands. Here's the traditional use. Quinoa thrives in cold, dry conditions that would destroy most crops. It tolerates frost, poor soils, saline conditions and drought. The seeds are rinsed to remove their natural saponin coating, then cooked like rice, ground into flour, or fermented. The leaves are edible as a salad green. One plant produces an extraordinary volume of seed per season. This wasn't just food, this was the foundation of an empire. Quinoa got forgotten in the West because Spanish colonizers suppressed Andean crops as part of a broader cultural destruction. It is only in recent decades that the world has rediscovered what the Inca never forgot. Think of it as the architectural foundation of civilization. Everything built on it lasts. Number 8, breadfruit. The tree that feeds a village. What if I told you there's a single tree that, once established, can produce hundreds of kilograms of starchy, calorie-dense fruit every year for decades with almost no ongoing maintenance? This tree was once the centerpiece of one of the most controversial maritime expeditions in British history, because the colonial establishment believed it could solve the problem of feeding entire populations on the absolute minimum investment possible. Modern research has confirmed that breadfruit is extraordinarily high in complex carbohydrates, dietary fiber, and micronutrients, including potassium, vitamin C, thiamine, and riboflavin. New studies have explored its potential as a food security crop in warming tropical and subtropical regions, including northern Australia, precisely because it requires minimal inputs once established and produces reliably across decades. A single mature tree can yield enough calories to make a meaningful contribution to a family's food security year-round. Here's the traditional use. In Polynesia, breadfruit has been a staple for over 3,000 years. It is roasted, boiled, baked, dried, fermented, or ground into flour. The fermented form can be stored for months or even years, providing a reserve of calories that requires no refrigeration. The latex of the tree seals wounds. The wood is used for construction. The leaves serve as animal fodder. Breadfruit got overshadowed in the modern era because it doesn't standardize well for industrial processing and doesn't ship profitably in its fresh form. This wasn't a failure of the crop. It was a failure of a food system designed around profit rather than nourishment. Think of it as a multi-decade investment in survival. Plant one tree and feed generations. Is not the wheat harvest today? I will call unto the Lord, and he shall send thunder and rain. 1 Samuel 12:17, number 9, lentils, the quiet sustainer of civilizations. Lentils are one of the oldest cultivated crops in human history, with archaeological evidence of their consumption stretching back more than 13,000 years in the Near East. They appear in the Bible, in ancient Egyptian texts, in the food records of Mesopotamian civilizations. Every major culture that built anything lasting in the ancient world had lentils. This was not coincidence. This was cause and effect. Modern nutritional science has confirmed what those ancient peoples demonstrated through survival. Lentils are extraordinarily protein-dense, containing around 25% protein by weight when dried. They are also rich in folate, iron, phosphorus, and manganese, and provide substantial dietary fiber that supports digestive function under high-stress conditions. Like cowpeas, lentils are nitrogen-fixing legumes. They improve the soil as they grow. Here's the traditional use. Lentils can be sprouted and eaten within days of harvest, providing fresh nutrition without cooking. They can be boiled into thick, protein-rich soups and stews. They can be dried and stored without refrigeration for years. Ground into flour, they become the base of flatbreads and pancakes. Fermented, they form the protein core of dishes like Indian dal and Ethiopian injera. Lentils got overlooked in the modern Western diet because cheap animal protein, produced through industrial agriculture, became accessible enough to push legumes into the role of a side dish rather than a staple. That dynamic will not survive a collapse of supply chains and industrial farming. Think of it as the protein library that never closes, always accessible, always nourishing, always ready. Number 10. Sunflowers. The utility crop. This is not merely a beautiful flower. A sunflower is a food system, a medicine chest, and a construction material growing in one spectacular column. Native American peoples cultivated sunflowers for thousands of years before European contact, using them for food, oil, dye, and structural fiber. The seeds were ground into a high-fat, high-protein paste eaten during long hunts and campaigns, essentially the original energy bar. Modern science has confirmed that sunflower seeds are extraordinarily rich in vitamin E, one of the most potent antioxidants found in any food source, as well as B vitamins, magnesium, selenium, zinc, and healthy polyunsaturated fats. The oil extracted from sunflower seeds is one of the most calorically dense plant-based foods available, with a single tablespoon providing more than 100 calories of clean-burning fuel. Here's the traditional use. The seeds are eaten raw, roasted, or ground into a paste. Cold-pressed, they produce a cooking oil with a high smoke point, suitable for a wide range of uses. The stalks, which grow to more than 3 meters tall, are structurally strong and have been used as building material. The heads can be dried and stored whole as a seed bank for subsequent planting seasons. Sunflowers got relegated to decoration in the modern era because their oil processing requires industrial equipment, and their seeds are rarely marketed as a staple food in the Western context. But in a world stripped back to basics, a field of sunflowers is a field of survival. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of the garden. Every part of it does something essential. Number 11, mushrooms, the crop that grows in the dark. And here we are at number 11, the one that requires no sunlight, the one that can grow underground, in a shed, in a basement, in the rubble of a building, the one that can be producing food in as little as 2 to 3 weeks from inoculation. If any single food source on this list could tip the scales between starvation and survival in the most extreme scenario imaginable, it is the cultivated mushroom, and specifically varieties like oyster mushrooms and shiitake that can be grown on agricultural waste, cardboard, sawdust, and straw. Modern research has increasingly recognized mushrooms not just as food, but as functional nutrition. Oyster mushrooms contain all 9 essential amino acids, significant levels of B vitamins including B12 analogues, and beta-glucans, complex polysaccharides that clinical trials have shown to meaningfully support immune function under stress. The fruiting bodies can be eaten fresh, dried and stored almost indefinitely, or ground into a protein-enhancing powder. Here's the traditional use. Across East Asia, mushroom cultivation has been practiced for over 1,000 years. In a survival context, cultivated mushrooms eliminate the foraging risk entirely. Oyster mushroom spawn can be propagated from a single culture across enormous quantities of substrate, producing wave after wave of harvestable food from materials that would otherwise be considered waste. Mushrooms got overlooked as a survival crop in the Western context because they don't fit the visual template of a traditional garden. The industrial food system has no efficient model for packaging something any person can grow in a dark corner with almost no equipment, and that precisely is what makes them extraordinary. Think of it as the light in the darkest room. The proof that even when the sun has stopped shining on everything else, something is still growing for you. For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:1, the 11 crops on this list: sweet potatoes, amaranth, moringa, cassava, kale, cowpeas, quinoa, breadfruit, lentils, sunflowers and mushrooms are not random selections from a gardening catalogue. They are the result of thousands of years of accumulated human wisdom about what actually sustains life when the comfortable scaffolding of modern supply chains is removed. Every single one of these crops was known, cultivated, and relied upon by civilizations that survive things we haven't even begun to imagine. The knowledge was never lost, it was only ever set aside. And in a world that feels increasingly uncertain, where supply chains stretch across vulnerable oceans, where climate patterns are shifting beneath the feet of industrial agriculture, where the distance between a supermarket shelf and an empty one is shorter than most people want to believe. Setting that knowledge aside is a risk that no thoughtful person can afford. Start small. A pot of kale. A cluster of sweet potato slips in a warm corner of the yard. A bag of lentil seeds in a cool, dry cupboard. A block of oyster mushroom substrate in a shed. These are not dramatic gestures. They are quiet acts of sovereignty. The reclamation of the one form of independence that no economic collapse, no supply chain failure, and no government policy can ever take from you. The ability to feed yourself from the ground beneath your feet. The ancient world knew this. The survivors always do.